They say evil doesn't knock before entering. It already lives inside your house, has a key, and often shares your bed, sleeping by your side every night. Today, I'm going to share my life story with you. Traumatic, but rich with human emotions. Good morning, my loves. My name is Ruth Johnson Williams, but everyone knows me as Grandma Ruth. I'm 73 years old, born in 1952 in Asheville, North Carolina, a beautiful mountain town that was always my parents' pride and joy. Today is the first time I'm telling this story. A story I've kept locked in my heart for over 60 years that I never told my children or grandchildren. So if you're watching now, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell, because your support gives me the courage to remove this burden I've carried since childhood. Oh, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Are you from Texas, California, Ohio, or maybe even from Canada? I want to get to know each of you, my dear viewers who accompany me on this journey through memories. Our house in Asheville was beautiful for its time. 2 stories, a front porch, and a small garden my mother tended with such care. Daddy was a bank employee, a respected man in town. Mama was a teacher at the local elementary school. We had a life many envied. At least that's how it appeared from the outside. What nobody knew was that inside that beautiful house, with lace curtains in the windows and always a cake baking in the oven, lived a secret so dark that even today I have difficulty speaking about it. That secret had a first and last name, Charlotte Johnson Miller, my half-sister on my father's side. Charlotte was 6 years older than me. She came to live with us when I was 9. Before that, she lived with her mother, a woman my father knew before meeting my mother, back in Charleston. When Charlotte's mother died of pneumonia, my father decided she would come live with us. It's the right thing to do, he would say. Blood is blood. At first, I was excited. I'd always wanted a sister. I imagined it would be like in the stories I read. We'd share secrets, borrow each other's clothes when we grew up, tell stories before bed. But Charlotte wasn't like the sisters in stories. From the first day, she looked at me differently. A look that left me cold, even in the 90-degree heat of a North Carolina summer. "This is your new home, Charlotte," my mother said, showing her the room where she would stay. "You'll share with Ruth. I know you two will get along well." That first night, when the lights went out and it was just the 2 of us in the room, Charlotte sat on the edge of my bed. "You're lucky, you know," she said, her voice low so no one would hear. "You grew up with a mother and father, in a beautiful house, everything easy for you." "I'm sorry about your mother," I replied, not knowing what else to say. She gave a dry laugh. "No, you're not. You don't even know me. But you will now." That same night it began. First, it was just touches. She waited until everyone was asleep and came to my bed. Said she was scared, that she didn't know the house, that she needed company. I, in my childish innocence, believed her. I let her lie with me. "Sisters need to be close," she whispered in my ear, as her hands began to explore places on my body I didn't even know existed. "This is what sisters do. It's our secret." When I tried to pull away, I felt her fingers squeezing my arm so hard it left a mark. "If you tell anyone, I'll say you started it, and I'll cut myself, say it was you. Then who do you think they'll believe? Me, poor thing, who just lost her mother, or you, the spoiled little girl who has everything?" Fear froze my entire body. I was 9 years old. I didn't fully understand what was happening, only knew it was wrong, that it hurt, that it made me feel dirty. That was just the first night of many. In the months that followed, Charlotte created a routine of terror. During the day, in front of my parents, she was the perfect sister, kind, attentive, always willing to help me with homework, braid my hair, play with me in the yard. "Look how well they get along," my father would comment to my mother, proud. "It's as if they've always been sisters." But when night came and the bedroom door closed, Charlotte transformed. Those same hands that braided my hair during the day now explored my body without permission. That same mouth that smiled in family photos now whispered threats in my ear. "If you tell, nobody will believe you. They'll think you're disgusting. They'll think you're the strange one." As time passed, Charlotte's games got worse. She began to hurt me on purpose. Scratches on my back, pinches in private areas, bites on my shoulders and stomach, always in places clothes would cover. When I cried, she covered my mouth. "Cry quietly, princess," she mocked. "We don't want to wake Mommy and Daddy, do we?" I tried to resist a few times. One night, when she came to my bed, I said I would scream. That I didn't care if nobody believed me, but that I would scream so loud the neighbors would come see what was happening. It was the first time I saw how calculating Charlotte could be. She didn't yell at me, didn't threaten me as she usually did. Instead, she smiled, returned to her bed, and the next day appeared at breakfast with a cut on her arm. "What happened?" my mother asked, horrified. "Nothing," Charlotte replied, tears in her eyes. "I think I scratched myself on the dresser during the night." Later, when we were alone, she showed me a small razor blade she had hidden. "Next time you threaten to tell, it won't just be a little cut, understand? And I'll say, you did this to me." The threat worked. I was 10 at the time. And the fear of not being believed, of being blamed for hurting the poor orphan my parents had taken in, was too great. And so months turned into years. Charlotte was 15, then 16, then 17. I was growing too, but remained trapped in that web of fear and shame. At school, I was the quiet girl, the one who never raised her hand, the one who always skipped PE when possible to avoid changing clothes in front of other girls and showing the bruises. My grades began to drop. I couldn't concentrate. I had nightmares almost every night. I started inventing illnesses to avoid going to school, to not be away from the protection, however illusory, that my parents' presence gave me. Mom began to suspect something was wrong. "Ruth, you've been so sad lately. Did something happen at school? Are the girls treating you badly?" I wanted so much to tell. The words were on the tip of my tongue, begging to come out. But then I remembered Charlotte's look, the hidden razor blade, the threats, and I swallowed it all back. "It's nothing, Mom. Just tired." Charlotte noticed that Mom was starting to ask questions. This made her even more careful and more cruel. She began to manipulate me not just with fear, but with guilt. "You know why I do this?" she asked me one night, after another session of torture disguised as sisterly affection. "Because you have everything. The perfect mother, the father I always wanted. I only got the leftovers. So now you give me a little of what's yours. It's fair, don't you think? How could an 11-year-old child respond to that? How could I understand cruelty masked as justice? I only knew it hurt, that it was wrong, that I wanted it to end. But the end came in a way I could never have imagined. It was an ordinary weekday. I woke up with a high fever, inflamed throat. Mom examined me, decided I wouldn't go to school. "I'll call the principal to let her know. You stay in bed today, my flower." Charlotte went to school as always. She was in her senior year, about to graduate. She already talked about going to college in Charleston, maybe even in New York City. The idea that she might leave was the only light at the end of the tunnel I could see. I spent the morning sleeping, the fever putting me in a state of semi-consciousness. When I woke up, I was thirsty. Mom had gone out to buy medicine at the pharmacy, leaving a note in the kitchen. The house was silent. I got out of bed, stumbling a little, still weak from the fever. I was wearing only a thin nightgown, as I had sweated a lot during the night. I went to the kitchen, got a glass of water. That's when I heard the key in the door. Mom had returned sooner than expected. I turned, glass in hand, ready to say I was already feeling better. But it wasn't just Mom. Dad was there too. The two had met on the street, from what I understood later, and both stopped at the kitchen door, looking at me with an expression I'll never forget. Confusion, then horror, then an anger I had never seen on my mother's face. "Ruth, what is that on your body?" she asked, her voice trembling. Only then did I realize. The thin nightgown, my body exposed in the kitchen light, the bruises on my arms, on my legs, the bite marks on my shoulder showing at the edge of the nightgown, the scratches on my thighs. I tried to cover up, tried to make excuses. I fell, played too rough, scratched myself in the yard, but Mom approached, gently raised the sleeve of my nightgown. There were finger marks there, clearly visible. Marks of adult hands on a child's body. "Who did this to you?" Dad asked. his voice so low and contained it seemed like he was about to explode at any moment. "Ruth, please. Who did this?" The tears came before the words. So long holding back, so long pretending, so long afraid. And now, there in the kitchen, with the midday light coming through the window and illuminating all the marks I had tried to hide, the dam finally broke. "Charlotte," I whispered, between sobs. It was Charlotte. "My dears, this is the first part of my story. It's difficult to talk about. My heart still aches even after so many years. But as the saying goes back home, a buried word is a wound that never heals. If this story is touching your heart, share it with someone you think needs to hear it. Sometimes it's in others' suffering that we find the courage to face our own." The kitchen fell silent after my confession. A silence so heavy it felt like the air had turned to stone. Mom stood still, her hand still holding the sleeve of my nightgown, her eyes fixed on the bruises. Dad leaned against the wall, as if he needed support to keep from falling. "How long?" Mom asked, her voice so low I almost didn't hear. "Since she arrived," I answered, tears streaming non-stop. "Almost 2 years." Dad made a strange sound, like a wounded animal. I saw something in him I had never seen before. A strong man, always firm, now seemed to be breaking inside. "Why didn't you tell us before, my child?" he asked, approaching and kneeling in front of me, his eyes watery. "She said no one would believe me," I sobbed. "Said she would cut herself and say it was me, that you would hate me, that you would send me away." Mom hugged me then, so carefully as if I were made of glass. I felt her tears wetting my hair as she whispered, "My God, my God, my God." She took me back to the bedroom, helped me change clothes, examining each mark on my body with a mixture of horror and contained anger I had never seen in her. I told everything, or almost everything. Some things were too difficult to even pronounce, but I told about the nights, the threats, the constant fear. Did she touch you?" Mom asked, her voice choked. I lowered my head, unable to answer with words. It was answer enough. What followed was like a hurricane. Dad left, slamming the door so hard the window glass shook. I heard the car start, tires screeching on the asphalt. Mom stayed with me, hugging me, crying, apologizing for not noticing sooner, for not protecting me. "It wasn't your fault, Mom," I repeated, feeling as if a huge weight had been lifted from my chest. For the first time in almost 2 years, I could breathe without that constant pressure. Someone knew. Someone believed me. I fell asleep in my mother's arms, exhausted from crying, exhausted from finally letting out everything I had kept in for so long. When I woke up, the sun was already setting. I heard raised voices coming from the living room. Dad had returned, and he wasn't alone. I got up from the bed, still weak, and went to the bedroom door. I opened it a crack and peeked out. In the living room, Dad was pacing back and forth like a caged tiger. Mom was sitting on the couch, her face marked from crying so much. And there was Charlotte, standing in the middle of the living room, still in her school uniform, her face pale, but with that defiant expression I knew so well. "It's a lie," she shouted. "She's making it all up. You're going to believe her instead of me? Me, who lost my mother, who has no one in the world." "Enough lies, Charlotte," Dad said, his voice shaking with anger. "Ruth told us everything. We saw the marks. And now I know why she's been so sad, so scared. It was you. All this time, it was you hurting my daughter." "Your daughter?" Charlotte laughed, but it was a cold laugh, without humor. "And what am I? The bastard you only accepted because my mother died and you had nowhere else to put me? We gave you a home," Mom exclaimed, standing up. "We treated you like a daughter, and you... She couldn't finish. The words caught in her throat. "You never really wanted me," Charlotte continued, her voice now lower, more controlled. "I was just an obligation, a stain on your perfect marriage. Ruth was always the favorite, the princess of the house. I just wanted her to feel a little of what I felt my whole life." The coldness with which she spoke chilled me to the bone. There was no remorse, no shame, just that cold anger I knew so well. "You're leaving this house today," Dad declared. "I've already called your aunt in Charleston. She'll pick you up tomorrow morning. Until then, you'll be locked in the guest room. And if you try anything at all, I'm going straight to the police. Police? Charlotte laughed again. And what are you going to say? That your bastard daughter abused your legitimate daughter? How nice that will look for your reputation at the bank, huh, Daddy? I saw my father's face contort with rage. For a moment, I thought he was going to hit her. But he restrained himself, his hands closed in fists. Get out of my sight, he growled. Now! Charlotte shrugged, as if none of it mattered. But when she turned to go to the guest room, her eyes met mine through the crack in the door, and what I saw there made me back away, frightened. It wasn't just anger. It was pure, crystalline hatred. A hatred that promised revenge. I quickly closed the door, my heart beating so hard it felt like it would come out of my mouth. Charlotte had been discovered, was leaving. I would finally be free. But that look said this wasn't over. The night that followed was strange. Mom brought dinner to me in the bedroom. Didn't want me near Charlotte even for a second. Dad stood guard at the guest room door, a chair placed in the hallway. Nobody slept well in that house. In the middle of the night, I heard Charlotte crying. They weren't the manipulative sobs I had heard so many times. It was a cry of anger, of frustration, the cry of someone who had lost the control they so valued. The next morning, Charlotte's aunt arrived early. She was a middle-aged lady we barely knew. She had come to her mother's funeral years before, but we had never seen her since. She seemed embarrassed, confused by the situation. What exactly happened? She asked Dad in the entrance hall. On the phone, you only said Charlotte couldn't stay here anymore. Dad hesitated, looking at Mom. How to explain something like this? How to put into words the horror of what had happened in that house? Charlotte needs help, Mom finally said. Help we can't give. She hurt Ruth. A lot. For a long time. The aunt didn't seem to understand immediately. Hurt how? Did they fight? Girls fight? It's normal? It wasn't a fight, Dad interrupted, his voice hard. It was abuse, systematic, for almost 2 years. Understanding slowly dawned on the lady's face. Her eyes widened, her mouth opened in shock. My God, but she's just a girl. She's 17 years old, Mom replied, her voice trembling. Old enough to know what she was doing, and to answer for what she did. Charlotte appeared then, carrying a small suitcase. She was dressed normally, her face clean of any emotion. She could have been going for a walk, not into exile. Aunt Regina, she greeted with a polite smile. Good to see you. The normalcy of it all was almost obscene. How could she act like this, after everything? How could she smile, speak normally, as if nothing had happened? I was hiding on the stairs, watching everything. I didn't want to see Charlotte, didn't want to be in the same space as her, but something compelled me to witness her departure, perhaps to make sure she was really leaving. Before going out the door, Charlotte turned. Her eyes scanned the room, as if looking for something. Or someone. Then she saw me, huddled on the stairs. For a second, our eyes met. And she smiled. Not the polite smile she had given her aunt. A different smile, just for me. A smile that said, this isn't over. Then she left. The door closed, and silence fell over the house like a heavy cloak. The days that followed were strange. A new and frightening freedom took hold of me. I no longer had to fear the nights, no longer had to hide marks, no longer had to make up excuses. But the habit of fear is hard to break. I still startled at sudden noises, still had nightmares, still looked over my shoulder as if expecting to see Charlotte at any moment. Mom took me to a doctor in Charlotte, NC. He examined the marks, asked gentle but direct questions, noted everything in a medical record. Then he talked at length with my parents in a separate room. When they came out, both had red eyes. We're going to take you to a psychologist too, Mom explained on the way back. Someone you can talk to about everything. The idea of talking about it with a stranger terrified me. But I agreed. I wanted to feel normal again, if I ever had been. Routine gradually returned. I went back to school, started therapy. The marks on my body began to disappear, but the invisible marks, the ones no one could see, were still there, pulsing under the skin. We had no more news of Charlotte for weeks. It was as if she had vanished from the map, taking with her the darkness she had brought to our house. I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, that nightmare was really over. Until the night the phone rang late. I was in my room, now just mine, without my half-sister's oppressive presence. I heard the phone ring, then my father's voice answering. Then silence. Then a sound of something falling, a muffled sound, as if someone was trying not to scream. I left the room, frightened. Dad was in the living room, the phone still in his hand, his face as pale as paper. "What happened?" I asked, my heart accelerating with fear. He looked at me as if he had forgotten I existed. His eyes were glazed, distant. "Dad," I insisted, approaching. "What happened?" "Charlotte ran away," he finally said, his voice hoarse. "She ran away from Aunt Regina's house last night. No one knows where she is." The floor seemed to disappear beneath my feet. Charlotte was out there somewhere, and I knew, with a terrible certainty, that she would come after me. That smile at the door, that look of hatred. She had promised without words that this wasn't over, and Charlotte always kept her promises. My loves, life sometimes presents us with challenges that seem too great to bear. But as my grandmother used to say, God doesn't give us a burden heavier than our shoulders can carry. At that moment, at 11 years old, I thought my small shoulders would break under the weight of fear. But what I didn't know was that the worst was yet to come. A storm was forming on the horizon, ready to fall on our family with a destructive force. In the next chapter, I'll tell you how an ordinary night turned into the worst nightmare anyone can imagine, and how the fire Charlotte carried inside finally transformed into real flames, consuming everything in its path. Sleeping became impossible after that call. Every noise in the house, every creak of the wood, every gust of wind at the windows seemed to be Charlotte coming to fulfill her silent promise. Dad tried to reassure me, saying she had probably run away far away, maybe to New York City, as she always talked about, to start a new life. But I knew Charlotte better than he did. I knew she wouldn't leave without getting revenge. For 3 days, we lived in a constant state of alert. Dad installed new locks on all doors and windows. Mom wouldn't let me go even to the gate alone. At school, one of the secretaries kept an eye on me all the time, following my parents' orders. I felt like I was in a prison, even knowing it was for my protection. On the 3rd night after the call, we were all tense, but starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, Dad was right. Maybe Charlotte had really gone away. That's when the smell came first. I was sleeping, or trying to sleep, when a strange odor invaded my room. Strong, chemical, making my eyes burn even closed. I woke up confused, my throat irritated, coughing. The room was dark, but there was an orange glow coming from the window. A glow that moved, that danced on the walls as if it were alive. I got out of bed, still groggy from sleep, and went to the window. What I saw froze the blood in my veins. Fire. The garden that Mom tended with such care was in flames. And in the middle of that infernal light, a figure stood out. Even at a distance, even with her face partially covered by a scarf, I would recognize those eyes anywhere. Eyes that had watched me so many nights, that had gleamed with pleasure at my fear, that had promised revenge. Charlotte. She was looking directly at my window, as if she knew I was there. In her hand, she held something that looked like a bottle. As I watched, paralyzed with horror, she raised the bottle in a silent toast to me, then threw it against the wall of the house. The explosion was small, but enough to spread more flames. The fire began to climb up the wall, licking the dry wood of the porch, devouring the curtains that Mom had made with such care. "Fire!" I screamed with all the strength in my lungs. "Mom! Dad! Fire!" I ran to the hallway, coughing with the smoke that was already starting to enter. I heard my parents waking up startled, doors opening. "What is it?" Dad asked, coming out of his and Mom's room. "Fire! The house is on fire! It's Charlotte! She's outside!" His face paled instantly. He ran to the hallway window, looked down, and let out a curse I had never heard him say before. "Mary!" he shouted to Mom. "Take Ruth and get out through the back! Now!" Mom appeared in the hallway, tying her robe, her eyes wide with fear. "What's happening, John?" "The house is on fire. Take the girl and get out. I'll call the fire department." The phone was downstairs. Dad ran down the stairs, disappearing into the smoke that was already starting to rise. Mom pulled me by the hand, guiding me to the back staircase, a narrow passage we rarely used. "What about Dad?" I asked, resisting. "We can't leave him. He'll come right after us," Mom replied, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "Now let's go!" We stumbled down the back stairs. The smoke was thinner there, but still made my eyes water and my throat burn. Outside, I could hear the crackling of flames devouring the front of the house, the snapping of wood yielding to heat. We managed to get out through the kitchen door, which led to a small fenced yard. Mom opened the gate that led to the side street, pushing me out. "Run to Mrs. Wilson's house," she ordered, referring to our neighbor across the street. "Ask her to call the police and the fire department. I'm going to get your father." "No, Mom," I grabbed her arm. "Come with me." But she gently freed herself. "Your father could be trapped in there. I can't leave him." "Go, Ruth, run!" The desperation in her voice made me obey. I ran down the side street, barefoot, wearing only my nightgown. The cold night air was a shock against my skin, hot from the heat of the fire. I knocked on Mrs. Wilson's door with all my strength, screaming for help. The light came on, the door opened, and the sleepy face of our neighbor appeared. It took just one look at my figure, barefoot, in a nightgown, covered in soot, and at the orange glow coming from our house for her to understand. "Good Lord!" she exclaimed. "Walter! Walter! Wake up and call the fire department! The Johnsons' house is on fire!" Her husband appeared, still buttoning his shirt. He looked in the direction of our house and ran out to the street, shouting for help. In minutes, the whole neighborhood was awake. Men came out of their houses with buckets, women screamed, children cried, frightened. I could only think of my parents, still inside that burning house. Why hadn't they come out yet? What had happened? Mrs. Wilson tried to keep me inside the house, but I escaped. I needed to see, needed to know. I ran back, ignoring her shouts for me to stay. When I arrived at the front of our house, the scene was pure hell. The flames had already taken over the entire lower floor. The porch had collapsed, taking part of the roof with it. Black smoke rose to the sky, swallowing the stars. "Mom!" I shouted, desperate. "Dad!" There was no response, just the roar of the fire, devouring everything it found in its path. I tried to run inside, but strong arms held me back. It was Mr. Wilson, Mrs. Wilson's husband. "No, child, you'll die if you go in there." "My parents are in there," I shouted, struggling. "Let me go. I need to help them." "The firefighters are coming," he tried to calm me. "They'll get your parents out. You can't do anything by going in there." At that moment, a deafening crash cut through the night. Part of the second floor collapsed, taking what remained of the roof with it. Sparks flew everywhere, like malignant shooting stars. "No!" The scream came from the depths of my soul. "Mom! Dad!" That's when I saw them. On the side of the house, staggering through the back door, came two figures covered in soot. Dad was carrying Mom in his arms. She seemed unconscious, her head hanging back, her face blackened by smoke. "Help!" Dad shouted, his voice hoarse. "She's not breathing!" Mr. Wilson let me go and ran to help. Other neighbors went too. They took Mom from Dad's arms, laid her on the street. Someone who had first aid knowledge began to perform mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. I stood, paralyzed, watching that scene as if it were a nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. Mom, always so strong, so alive, now motionless on the cold asphalt. Dad, kneeling beside her, coughing violently, his face contorted with pain and despair. And then, in the midst of the confusion, a movement caught my attention. A figure was moving away, walking quickly down the side street. Even in the dim light, I recognized the walk, the silhouette, Charlotte. Something inside me snapped. All the fear, all the pain, all the anger I had kept in for years exploded at once. Without thinking, I began to run after her. "Come back here!" I shouted. "Look what you did! Come back here!" She looked back, saw me running toward her, and quickened her pace. But I was driven by a force I had never felt before. I ran like never before, my bare feet hitting against the asphalt, ignoring the pain, ignoring everything except the figure fleeing in front of me. At the corner, I almost caught her. I reached out, grabbed the hem of her shirt. She turned, surprised by my proximity. For a second, our eyes met. In her eyes, I saw something I had never seen before: fear. For the first time, Charlotte was afraid of me. But the moment passed quickly. She broke free with a violent pull, making me lose my balance and fall to the ground. When I got up, she had already disappeared into the darkness of the street. I heard sirens in the distance. The firefighters were finally coming. I also heard someone shouting my name. Dad's voice, hoarse from smoke, but still strong, calling me back. I ran back to where I had left my parents. Mom was sitting now, coughing a lot, but alive. Alive. The relief was so great that my legs weakened, and I fell to my knees beside her. "Mom," I sobbed, hugging her carefully. "I thought I had lost you." She tried to smile, but another coughing fit prevented her. Her eyes, red and irritated from the smoke, searched for mine. "I'm okay," she finally managed to say, her voice almost unrecognizable. "Thank God we're all okay." At that moment, the firefighters arrived, followed closely by an ambulance. We were all taken to the hospital, treated for smoke inhalation. Mom was admitted, as she had breathed much more smoke than us, having been trapped in a room when part of the ceiling collapsed. At the hospital, lying on a gurney next to the bed where Dad was being medicated, I told about seeing Charlotte, about running after her. "She wanted to kill us," I concluded, tears streaming down my face, still dirty with soot. "She wanted to end us." Dad squeezed my hand hard. His eyes, always so sure, were now filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "She won't get near you again," he promised. "Never again." While the doctors worked, police officers came to take our statement. We told everything: about the abuse, about Charlotte's expulsion, about the fire. They wrote it all down, promised they would find her, that she would answer for what she did. But I knew, deep in my heart, that Charlotte wouldn't be easy to capture. She was smart, calculating, and now she was desperate, which made her even more dangerous. That night, lying in a hospital bed, with the smell of disinfectant replacing that of smoke, I stayed awake for hours, looking at the ceiling. Our house, the place where I was born, where I grew up, no longer existed. All my toys, my books, my clothes, everything had turned to ashes. But the worst wasn't the material things. It was knowing that Charlotte was still out there, somewhere, and that her hatred for me had no limits. Dawn found me still awake, my eyes burning with fatigue and smoke. Through the hospital window, I saw the sun rising, tinting the sky pink and gold. A new day. We were alive. We had survived. But at what cost? And for how long would we be safe? My dear viewers watching me today, sometimes life puts us face to face with evil in its purest form. That night was just the beginning of a long and painful journey. The fire Charlotte set didn't just consume our house, it consumed our peace, our sense of security, and left scars I carried for decades. Life sometimes breaks us into 1,000 pieces, my loves. But as I learned from my grandmother, a cracked pot still boils water. And that's how, cracked but still functioning, I faced the years that followed. We spent 2 weeks living at Mrs. Wilson's house after the fire. Her and her husband's generosity saved us in that difficult time. We shared the guest room, improvised with mattresses on the floor. The clothes we wore were donations from neighbors and the church, pieces that didn't fit us right, but that kept us dressed while we tried to decide what to do. Our house no longer existed. The outer walls were still standing, blackened by smoke, but the interior had been completely destroyed. The piano where Mom taught me to play, the armchair where Dad read the newspaper every night, the collection of books I kept so carefully, everything turned to ashes. Even the family photographs, the records of our entire history, had disappeared in the flames. But the worst wasn't the material losses. It was the fear, the constant, suffocating fear that wouldn't let me sleep at night, that made me start at any noise, that prevented me from being alone even for a minute. Charlotte hadn't been found. The police searched all over Asheville, extended the search to neighboring towns, even to Charlotte, NC. Nothing. It was as if she had evaporated like the smoke from the fire she caused. 2 weeks after the fire, Dad gathered us for a serious conversation. "We can't continue like this," he said, his voice still hoarse from the damage caused by the smoke. "We need to start over. Somewhere else." "Somewhere else?" I asked, confused. Asheville was the only home I knew. My school, my few friends, everything was there. Another state, Dad explained, far from here, where she can't find us. Mom nodded, her eyes still carrying that distant look she had had since the fire. She had been the most physically affected, lungs damaged by smoke, light burns on her arms and legs. But the worst were the invisible scars, the trauma of almost dying, of seeing everything she had built destroyed in minutes. "Where to?" she asked, her voice a whisper. "Ohio," Dad replied. "I have a cousin in Columbus. He arranged a job for me at the bank there. We can start over. Nobody knows us there. Nobody knows her." And so, 1 month after the fire, we found ourselves on a bus that would cross the country, carrying only what we could buy with insurance money and some donations. 3 suitcases containing everything we owned in the world. 3 lives reduced to some clothes, documents, and the memories we carried inside us. Some too good to forget, others too painful to remember. The journey was long and tiring. 2.5 days on the road, stopping only for quick meals and bus changes. I alternated between looking out the window, seeing America pass in a blur of colors, and sleeping a restless sleep, populated with dreams where Charlotte chased me through burning mazes. When we finally arrived in Columbus, it was like landing on another planet. The city was so different from Asheville, larger, busier, with a climate that made my bones ache with cold in the first days. People talked differently, with an accent I sometimes barely understood. Dad's cousin, Uncle Gerald, received us in his home, a small but comfortable apartment downtown. We would stay there until we found our own place. "You'll like it here," he assured us, while showing us where we would sleep. "The people are hospitable. There are good schools for the girl. Opportunities." It was strange being called the girl by someone who didn't even know me. Everything was strange. I felt like a plant pulled from the earth with exposed roots, thrown into unknown soil. In the first week, I barely left the apartment. The fear of Charlotte had transformed into something bigger. Fear of the world out there, of unknown people, of everything that was new and unpredictable. My parents noticed and began to worry. "She needs help," I heard Mom say to Dad one night when they thought I was sleeping. "It's not normal for a child to be like this, always scared, always looking over her shoulder." So, besides a new house and a new school, I also got a new routine. Weekly sessions with a child psychologist, Dr. Samuels. At first, I hated going. Sitting in a room with a stranger and talking about the most painful things in my life was torture. Many times I stayed silent the entire session, just drawing on the sheets she gave me. But gradually, very gradually, the words began to come out. The knot I had in my throat whenever I thought about Charlotte, the abuse, the fire, began to loosen a little. Dr. Samuels had a way of asking questions that didn't scare me, that didn't make me feel judged or broken. "What happened to you wasn't your fault," she repeated in each session, like a mantra. "And it doesn't define who you are or will be." Time passed. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Dad started at his new job. Mom found work as an assistant at an elementary school. She couldn't teach anymore because of her weakened lungs, which left her breathless easily. We found a small apartment to rent, set up our new home with simple furniture piece by piece. Life was slowly getting back on track, but the nightmares continued. Almost every night, I woke up screaming, sweaty, heart racing. Sometimes I dreamed about the fire, the flames surrounding me. Other times, it was Charlotte in my room, that cold smile on her lips, hands extending to touch me. At the new school, I was the strange girl, the one who didn't talk much, who startled when someone came from behind, who sometimes froze in the middle of class, eyes fixed on emptiness, as if seeing something no one else could see. The other children avoided me. They made up stories, that I was an orphan, that I had a contagious disease, that I was crazy. I didn't care. I preferred to be alone. People meant danger. Trust meant vulnerability. And I had sworn never to be vulnerable again. In our second year in Columbus, when I was 13, we had a scare. A letter arrived for us with no return address. Inside, just a newspaper clipping. It was a small news item, the kind that occupies just a corner of the page. It talked about an arson fire in Cincinnati at a boarding house. 2 people had died. It didn't mention names, but there was something handwritten in the margin of the clipping. Still not over. The handwriting. We knew that handwriting well. Dad took the letter to the police immediately. They filed a report, promised to investigate. But with no return address, no clear fingerprints, there was little they could do. They reinforced the recommendation they had given us when we left North Carolina. Keep a low profile, don't disclose your whereabouts, stay alert. That letter destroyed the little peace we had achieved. The fear returned with full force. Dad installed new locks in the apartment. Mom started picking me up from school every day, no matter how tired she was. I went back to having nightmares every night, having panic attacks at school, refusing to be alone. More sessions with Dr. Samuels were scheduled. She tried to help me deal with the return of fear, not to let Charlotte, even at a distance, continue controlling my life. She wants this, Dr. Samuels explained. She wants you to live in fear. It's the power she still has over you. Don't let her win. Easier said than done. How not to be afraid of someone who abused you for years, who tried to kill your family, who promised that it's still not over. The years passed. I turned 14, then 15, then 16. Adolescence, which should be a time of discovery, of first loves, of experiencing life, for me was a time of constant survival. Each day I managed to get through without a panic attack was a victory. Each night I slept without nightmares was a miracle. We never received another letter. We never had direct news of Charlotte again, but her shadow remained over us like a toxic cloud that refused to dissipate. At 17, something began to change inside me. The anger, which had always been there, buried under layers of fear and shame, began to emerge. Anger at Charlotte, for everything she had done. Anger at myself, for still allowing her to have so much power over my life. Anger at the world, which allowed people like her to exist. It was during this time that I discovered running. It started as a suggestion from Dr. Samuels, exercise to help with anxiety. But it soon became more than that. When I ran, the noise in my head, the intrusive thoughts, the painful memories, the constant fear, silenced for a while. It was just me, my breathing, my steps on the track. I ran every day, further and further, faster and faster. Running became my escape, my therapy, my salvation. And without me realizing it at first, it also became my strength. My body, which for so long had been a source of shame and trauma, was now becoming strong, agile, capable. I felt the muscles developing, the endurance increasing. For the first time since the abuse, I felt that my body belonged to me again, that it was mine to strengthen, to care for, to fully inhabit. In my senior year of high school, I joined the school's track team. It was the first time I allowed myself to be part of something, to connect with other people. My teammates didn't know my story, didn't understand why I was so closed off, so cautious. But they respected my space, admired my dedication. And I began, slowly, to lower some of the walls I had built around my heart. At 18, an important decision: where to go after school, what to do with my life. My parents wanted me to go to college, study something safe, business, accounting, something that would guarantee stability. But I had other plans. I wanted to keep running. I wanted to see how far my legs could take me. I wanted the feeling of freedom I only felt when I was in motion, leaving miles behind. That's when I heard about a selection for athletes in Cleveland, a training program that could lead to bigger competitions, maybe even national ones. It was a long shot, but I decided to try. To everyone's surprise, especially mine, I was accepted. At 19, I packed my bags again, this time by my own choice, and moved to Cleveland. It was scary and exciting at the same time. For the first time in my life, I was taking the reins of my destiny, choosing my own path. The training program was intense, waking up at 5 a.m., a training until my body begged for rest, studying techniques, learning about nutrition and physiology. I shared a tiny apartment with 2 other athletes, girls from backgrounds as diverse as mine, each with her own story to tell. In the first few months, I maintained my usual reserve. I didn't talk about my past, avoided personal questions, kept everyone at a safe distance. But it's hard to keep walls up when you live, train, cry, and laugh with the same people every day. Lisa was the first to break through my defenses. She was from Texas, had that direct way Texans have, and decided she would be my friend whether I wanted it or not. Everyone has a past, she told me one night after I refused yet another invitation to go out with the group. Some heavier than others, but that's what it is. It's the past. You can't let it steal your present too. Simple words, but they hit something deep inside me. For how long would I still allow Charlotte, who I didn't even know if was alive or dead, who could be on the other side of the world, to continue controlling my life? Gradually, very gradually, I began to open up. I didn't tell everything, not all at once, but small pieces of my story began to come out. And I discovered something surprising. Sharing the burden made it lighter, not heavier, as I had always feared. The competitions began, small, local at first, then state level. The absolute focus that running required was therapeutic. There was no room for fear or doubt when you're on the track, when every second counts. And then, at 22, the opportunity that would change everything. A chance to compete nationally, representing Ohio in the U.S. Track and Field Championships. That's when the past came back to haunt me once more. Life has a strange way of testing our strength just when we start to believe we're finally safe. At the height of what seemed to be my fresh start, Charlotte's ghost reappeared in a way I could never have imagined. And it was in this moment of extreme trial that I discovered what I was really made of. The U.S. Track and Field Championships would be in Los Angeles. 3 days of competition with athletes from all over the country. It was my dream coming true, and also my biggest challenge. I had never competed at such a high level, with so much pressure, with so many people watching. I left Cleveland with the Ohio delegation, my heart beating between excitement and fear. My parents promised they would come watch. It would be the first time they would see me compete. They never fully understood why I chose this path, but they supported me from a distance, as best they could. Los Angeles was an explosion of colors, sounds, and smells that left me dizzy in the first days. The athletes' village, set up near the stadium, was a little world apart, with competitors from all states, all focused, all nervous, all dreaming of the podium. My main event would be the 5,000 meters. I wasn't a favorite, far from it. But I had trained hard, had consistently improved my times in recent months. I was determined to give my best, to prove to myself that I could face this challenge. On the eve of the competition, we were all in the cafeteria when one of the organizers came in with a list in her hands. "Attention, everyone," she called. "Tomorrow starts early. I'll go through the final schedules of the events and the names of the judges for each category." I listened distractedly as she read the list. My mind was already on the track, visualizing each curve, each strategy I had discussed with my coach. And in the women's 5,000 meters, the judges will be Marcus Reynolds, Charlotte Miller, and Robert Torres. The world stopped. The noise in the cafeteria disappeared. The air became thick, impossible to breathe. Charlotte Miller. Could it be a coincidence? How many Charlotte Millers could there be in the United States? But my heart knew. That chill down my spine, that sensation of falling into a bottomless pit, my body recognized the danger before my mind fully processed it. "Are you okay?" Lisa asked beside me, noticing my sudden paleness. "You look like you've seen a ghost." A ghost. That was exactly it. The ghost that had been haunting me for more than 10 years, that had destroyed my childhood, that had tried to kill my family. And now she would be a judge in my event. I left the cafeteria in a trance, ignoring Lisa's calls. I needed air, needed to think. In the courtyard of the village, I sat on a bench, shaking despite the heat of Los Angeles. It was her. It had to be. The coincidence would be too absurd. But how? How had she gotten there? How had she become a track and field judge? And more importantly, did she know I would be competing? I took my cell phone with trembling hands, called my parents. I needed to warn them, needed them to stay away from the stadium. If Charlotte recognized me, if she recognized them, I didn't even want to think about what could happen. Dad answered on the third ring. "Ruth, is everything okay, honey? We're almost to Los Angeles." "Dad," my voice came out strangled. "Don't come. Please, don't come." "What happened?" His tone immediately changed to concern. "Are you okay?" "She's here," I managed to say, the words almost choking in my throat. "Charlotte. She's a judge in my event." Silence on the other end of the line. Then his voice, contained but tense. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely." "I haven't seen her yet, but they announced the name. Charlotte Miller." "How many can there be? And just in my event?" "We're 2 hours from LA," he said, determined. "We'll arrive, but we won't go to the stadium. We'll go to the nearest police station. If it really is her, the police need to know. She's still wanted for the arson." The reality of the situation began to sink in. Charlotte, the person I feared most in the world, would be tomorrow in the same space as me, judging my race, perhaps planning, what? Revenge? After so long? I spent the night awake, debating what to do. Quit the race? Confront her? Hide until the police acted? Each option seemed impossible, and time was running out. In the morning, my coach noticed something was wrong. "You don't look well, Ruth. Are you sick?" I couldn't explain. How to summarize that whole story? How to make him understand the terror I felt? I just mumbled something about pre-competition nervousness. The time of the race was approaching. I put on my uniform, tied my shoes, warmed up my muscles, mechanical movements my body performed while my mind screamed in panic. That's when Dr. Samuel's words came to me from so many years ago. "She wants this. She wants you to live in fear. It's the power she still has over you. Don't let her win." A sudden clarity took hold of me. That was it. Charlotte still controlled my life, even from a distance. If I gave up now, she would win. Again. As she had won when she silenced me for years, when she drove us from our city, when she forced me to live hidden in my own skin. No. This time would be different. This time, I wouldn't run away. As I walked to the track with the other competitors, I looked in the stands for the judges, and there she was. Older, of course. Like me, a decade had passed since our last encounter. Shorter hair, thin-framed glasses, a clipboard in her hands. But it was her. The same eyes, the same posture, the same air of superiority I knew so well. Our eyes met. I saw the exact moment when she recognized me. The surprise, then something more. A gleam I knew very well. That predatory gleam that preceded her worst cruelties. I didn't look away. For the first time in my life, I faced Charlotte without fear. I felt my whole body shaking, but it wasn't from terror anymore. It was from anger. Pure, clean, justified anger. Anger for the child I was, for the teenager I couldn't be, for the stolen years, for the scars I carried inside and out. The competitors were called to their positions. My mind was divided. Part focused on the race, part alert to every movement of Charlotte. She stayed in her place, observing, taking notes. Professional, as if she were a normal person, as if she weren't a monster. The starting gun sounded. I began to run. In the first few meters, my body seemed heavy, awkward. Fear was still trying to pull me down. But then, something happened. With each step, each breath, I began to feel a strength growing inside me. This track, this race, it was my territory, not hers. Here, I had control. Here, I was strong. Here, I could win. The 5,000 meters is a test of both mental and physical endurance. 12.5 laps around the track, almost 15 minutes of continuous effort, of fighting against fatigue, against the desire to give up. Halfway through the race, I was among the top 5. It wasn't my usual position. I usually stayed further back, but there was an energy propelling me that I had never felt before. Each time I passed the judges' stand, I felt Charlotte's gaze following me, and instead of intimidating me, it fueled my determination. Last lap. The bell rang, announcing the final 400 meters. I was in 4th place, the leader from California already with a considerable advantage. But it wasn't about winning a medal. It was about proving, to Charlotte, to myself, that she no longer had power over me. I accelerated. I passed the athlete from Illinois. Then, in the final curve, I passed the New Yorker who was in 2nd place. The leader was too far ahead, unreachable. But 2nd place? 2nd place, I could conquer. I crossed the finish line in 2nd, a time I never imagined achieving. The crowd applauded. My coach jumped at the side of the track, hardly believing it. I was breathless, exhausted, but a wave of euphoria invaded me. I had achieved my best time. I had won my first national medal. And I had done it all under the gaze of the person who swore to destroy me. In the ceremonies that followed, Charlotte was absent. Another judge handed out the medals. Later, I learned that she had left the stadium in a hurry, claiming a family emergency. Family emergency. The irony was almost funny. When I finally met with my parents, in a discreet cafe far from the stadium, they had news. They had gone to the police, reported Charlotte's presence, provided all the details they could. The police promised to investigate immediately. "Is it really her?" Mom asked, her face tense with concern. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely," I replied. We looked at each other. She recognized me. I recognized her. "And what did you feel?" Dad asked, holding my hand. I thought for a moment before answering. Strength. I felt strength. That night, in the athletes' village, I received a call from the Los Angeles police. They wanted me to come to the station to give a formal statement. Charlotte had been detained when trying to board a bus to San Francisco. What followed was a whirlwind. I returned to Cleveland with my silver medal and a summons to testify in the reopened case against my half-sister. I had to tell everything again: the abuse, the fire, the escape, the years of fear. But this time, I spoke with a strength I didn't possess before. I was no longer a frightened girl. I was a woman who had faced her greatest fear and remained standing. The trial took place 6 months later. Charlotte was charged with multiple crimes: child abuse, attempted murder, arson. The evidence was overwhelming. Besides my testimony and that of my parents, there was the fire at the boarding house in Cincinnati, which was finally linked to her. 2 people had died in that fire, a crime for which she had never been punished. Facing her in court was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Sitting on the witness stand, yards away from her, feeling those eyes that had terrorized me so much staring at me while I detailed the horrors she had inflicted. It was like reliving all the trauma at once, but there was a fundamental difference. This time, I wasn't alone. My parents were there. My friends from athletics had come to support me. My coach was in the audience. And most importantly, I was no longer that girl silenced by fear. I was a survivor, telling her story not with shame, but with the certainty that the truth needed to be told. Charlotte was sentenced to 30 years in prison. When the judge announced the sentence, I looked at her one last time. There was no longer that gleam of superiority in her eyes, just emptiness. The emptiness of someone who finally faces the consequences of their actions. I left the courthouse that day feeling something I had never experienced before. Peace. Not complete. I doubt I'll ever be completely free of the scars of the past, but a peace sufficient to breathe without that weight on my chest, to sleep without checking 3 times if the doors are locked, to live without constantly looking over my shoulder. Life went on. I continued in athletics for a few more years, winning other medals, other titles. But the most important thing was what I conquered within myself: the freedom to be who I wanted to be, without fear dictating my choices. At 28, I met David, a sports physiotherapist who worked with injured athletes. Our first meeting was professional, an ankle injury that stubbornly refused to heal. But something about him, perhaps the kindness with which he treated everyone, perhaps the infinite patience, perhaps simply the fact that for the first time in my life I was really open to the possibility of loving, captivated me from the start. It took me time to trust, to open up. Even after months of dating, there were still parts of my story I couldn't share. But David was patient. "You'll tell me when you're ready," he would say. "If you're never ready, that's okay too. I love who you are now, not just your story." At 30, we got married. A small ceremony, just family and close friends. Mom cried throughout the ceremony. Tears of joy, of relief, of gratitude for seeing her daughter finding happiness despite everything. At 32, our first child, Michael, was born. Holding that baby in my arms for the first time was a transformative experience. Looking at his perfect little face, I swore I would do everything to protect him, so he would never know the kind of pain I knew. But I also swore I would teach him to be strong, to face his fears, to never allow others to define who he is. At 35, our daughter, Lily, arrived, and with her, A decision. It was time to tell our story. Not to her, she was still too young, but to the world. I wrote a book, using pseudonyms to protect my family's privacy. I detailed everything: the abuse, the fire, the escape, the years of fear, and finally, the liberation. The book wasn't a bestseller, but it found its audience. I began to receive letters, emails, messages from other survivors, people who had gone through similar situations and found comfort and hope in my story. That's how I began working with NGOs dedicated to the protection of children and adolescents. Not as a psychologist or social worker, I never had training for that, but as someone who could share her experience, who could tell survivors, I understand, I've been through this, and there is life after trauma. At 40, I discovered another passion: painting. I started as therapy, as a way to express emotions I still had difficulty verbalizing, but it soon became more than that. My canvases, full of vibrant colors and abstract forms, began to attract attention. I had my first exhibition at 43 in a small gallery in Cleveland, a complete, full life, which seemed impossible for that terrified girl from Asheville. A life I built not despite my past, but in a way, because of it. Because it was the trauma that taught me about resilience, about the human capacity to heal, about the importance of extending a hand to others who suffer. Today, at 73, I look back and see the long road I've traveled. I see the scars, yes, some never completely disappear. I still have occasional nightmares. There are still certain triggers that momentarily take me back to that dark place. But I also see the strength I found, the people I helped, the love I gave and received. Charlotte died in prison, 15 years after her conviction. A heart attack, according to the official report. When I received the news, I didn't feel joy or relief or closure, as they say. I felt nothing. Because long before she died physically, I had already killed the power she had over me. My dear viewers watching me today, if this story touches your heart, share it with someone who might need to hear that there is life after trauma, that pain does not define who we are, that our tormentors only have the power we allow them to have. And if you're going through something similar, know that you're not alone. Help is available. There are people who will believe you. There is a future where this pain doesn't dominate every aspect of your life. If you're not subscribed to this channel yet, click on that red button down there and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. A tight hug from Grandma Ruth, who learned that sometimes life breaks us so we can be rebuilt stronger, wiser, and more capable of extending a hand to those who are still broken.